Hey guys, my name is Arnold, and I'll be speaking about how to use Redux efficiently in React.js. So before that, let me introduce you all to my. Let me introduce myself to you all. So I'm Arnold Parke. I'm one of the tech leads here at Nonstop Biotechnologies, and I have worked in web development, mobile development, and even backend. And overall, I have around 8 years of experience. And I am a speaker, mentor, tech content creator, and also I have written a lot of blogs. And not only me, but all of my team members, a lot of my team members have also written a lot of interesting blogs and made some content, tech content. So make sure you follow us. You can scan this, and you will get link of all my social handles. Okay, so first question is why it is. But before that, I would really like to know, uh, raise your hand if you have used Redux in production apps. Okay, not too many. Okay, that's fine. And how many of you know Redux, but not used in production yet, are aware of Redux, or at least have just checked out, yes, yes, Redux. Okay, cool. Fine. So since a lot of you are at least aware of this Redux library, so can any one of you tell me why we should use Redux? Any guesses? Uh,
If your application is big enough and has a need to manage the state, then you should use Redux. And it's just the idea of using Redux is to manage the state across the application so that you don't have to go through a lot of trouble to pass on the state from one component to other.
okay, any other answers? Yes. Yes. You can say it out loud. Sorry, I can't.
It's actually, so it avoids the prop building for like we have to pass the data from, if we have to pass the data, we have to pass the as a prop to each of the component, like coming from, if the component is not directly linked to that particular. So
Yeah, okay.
we have to assign a global state and all those things. So Redux does like that. It the store is available globally, and we can move all the data.
Right. Okay, cool. So I have some couple of answers from you. So if you are trying to solve a problem statement, something like prop drilling, only prop drilling, then I would say that it would be an overkill to use Redux, honestly. I mean, so there are some problem statements. For example, one of you said prop drilling. But prop drilling can be solved by simply using use context and provider, right? So Redux itself uses that, but it is basically just one of the features that Redux gives you. So if you use Redux only for that, solving that particular problem statement, then that would be an overkill, right? And also, for example, if you use Redux only to separate out the business logic with the UI, for that you would use customers, right? So if you are solving only those particular problem statements, then maybe Redux is not the state management you really require. So it is basically an overkill. So for example, let's say that you want to buy a car, okay? A very fancy car, a super fast car, uh, something maybe like Porsche. And you are rich enough to buy that Porsche and you buy it. But the problem is you're only 17 years old, right? And then you would end up writing an essay. So that is definitely an overkill. So Porsche has a lot of features. It is super fast. It is very performant. But using it to fly collecting other roads, that is definitely an overkill, right? I mean, so this is very similar. So why we should really use Redux is this gentleman said it right. So that is one of the best feature that and also you said it. That is one of the best feature that Redux provides. So Redux gives you a centralized state management, okay, a centralized global state management, and that state can be used in multiple components. And what that ultimately gives you is a very decoupled components, okay. And with that, the components are not basically completely independent of each other. Because of that, you can move around the components anywhere in the app. Okay, that is the best feature that I have found, that I really like. So you don't have to pass on the props or any of the features, any of the properties or arguments, unless if it is something reusable. Of course, you will have to pass on those properties. But yeah, but there's just one catch that your components in the hierarchy, like the component hierarchy in the tree, there has to be a provider that supplies the store. That's all. That is the only catch. So that is the best feature. The other one is it has predictable state. Now, what does predictable state mean? Is you will always know like what and how the state of that store changed. That is because the state is always read-only in Redux. Now, when I say read-only, you might think if it is read-only, then how is it getting updated? So it gets updated only via action and dispatcher. Okay. Since we have some predefined actions, so we will know that this state got updated only by this action. We cannot directly get the value of the state and simply change it. For example, if we have some number and we want to increment it, right? And if we directly take that number and do that number plus plus, we won't increment it directly. We will need to do this in a reducer and then dispatch an action that will perform that dispatcher's code. Sorry, reducer's code, right? Yeah, so centralized state management, predictable state, separation of concern. So separation of concern is not only limited to UI and business logic, but in UI itself, if there is a big, huge component, you can definitely, it is a huge component, you can definitely break it into smaller components. And that is actually one of the best practices. And I really insist or I really suggest you also try breaking out your components into smaller ones. I will explain you why we should do that and how is it beneficial. And of course, we have a very large community for Redux. These are very less reasons why to use Redux, but the main reasons why we should use Redux. But there are more. You can anytime search it and you will get it. So what is Redux? So ideally, I should have asked this before why Redux, but I asked what Redux after why because I wanted to know your genuine answers about why we should use Redux. Because if I tell you what is Redux, then you will obviously answer the same thing to me if I ask why Redux, right? So now what is Redux? Redux is, I'll shorten this. I won't go too deep in this because the main topic is like how to use Redux efficiently, right? So what is Redux? Redux is basically a state management tool, okay, state management library. And it uses Flux architecture. Actually, I was about to ask this, I forgot to ask. Uses Flux architecture. So does anyone know what is Flux architecture? No, okay. So basically, a very short history about it is, a lot of you might already know that Redux was built by Facebook, right? So Facebook had a problem. So their problem statement was they were earlier using MVC, and with MVC they had a lot of models, views, controller, and there was a lot of mess because everything was wired among each other. So it was very difficult to manage the state and scale the app. So that was the biggest problem, and that is when they figured out and invented Flux architecture. So what you see in Redux, the components that you might be aware of. So those are that is actually a Flux architecture. So using Flux in Redux for that, they built Redux library. So in Flux architecture or in Redux, can anyone tell me what are the main components of Redux? Yes, someone's actions, that is correct. So we have actions. So that is the first thing that the user would do. So we first perform an action, right? After performing an action, we have dispatcher. So dispatcher is basically uh, you use any delivery apps, right? And then in that delivery apps, you get notifications your delivery is dispatched. So it is just to deliver it. So action, so what dispatcher does is it basically delivers your action to the store, and then store updates the state. Okay. After updating the state, it then informs the view the registered components that your the state that you are dependent on is updated. So you need to re-render. Okay. So this is how Flux architecture works. And this is a unidirectional, so it will always go in one direction. It is not bi-directional. Okay, so let's dive into the code. So I have built a very simple app. Okay, it's not too fancy. It is very simple app just for you guys to understand, so that everyone will know like what is going on. Can everybody read this? Everyone at the back, can you guys read? I'm sorry, you have the screen. You guys can read, right? Okay, cool. So this is a very simple app. I have one component, counter component. You can ignore the counter loader. That has got nothing to do with this demo. So see the counter component, that is one single component, right? And inside that, I have a count, and then the increment button and decrement button. And wait, let me just show you quickly how is the store built. So this is the store configuration where I have two states, counter and name. So name is basically a user state. Okay. In the counter, I simply have one value, that is number, and two users increment and decrement. So now let me run this. Visible enough, right? So this is very simple. I have one count, a number, then increment and decrement button. If I click on increment, it will increment, and on clicking on decrement, it will simply decrement. Now we don't see any problem in this because it is a very small application. But imagine if this was a big application, there could be issues. How and why I will show you. So I have React DevTools. So in that, so if you any one of you have used React DevTools, okay, cool, fine. It is I would really suggest you really use this. So this is basically just an extension on Chrome. It is really helpful. So if you go in the settings, you need to turn this on. Highlight updates when components re-render. Okay. So I have turned that on now. Now if I click on increment, do you see those all of the three components are getting re-rendered? They are getting highlighted, right? So if I click on either increment or decrement, all the components on the UI are getting re-rendered. So that is definitely not what we want, because this is very, very simple, but imagine a fairly complex application where there is a lot of UI and maybe in each of the components, there is a lot of computation happening, maybe API calls or something. And if we perform something where only the count should be updated, but instead every component is getting re-rendered, then it will definitely do some operations that is not supposed to do. That will also create some issues and uh, so that will also create some issues, and it will also not be the best of the performance for the app, right? So how we can fix this is, what I will do, I will simply move the sorry, I'll simply move the increment and decrement button out of the counter component. Okay. And so I have not done a lot of I have not done any drastic changes. I have simply moved the increment and decrement button out of the counter component. And now if we see in the browser, if we increment, only the count is getting updated. Only the count is getting re-rendered. Okay. Increment or decrement. Right. So now it is definitely giving better performance. Now again, if you would imagine having a very complex UI or complex application, this will be very, very beneficial. So how is this happening is simply because of the use of useSelector. So useSelector is basically very important. It is important to know where and how to use useSelector in Redux. So useSelector will basically what it will do is it will register your component and tell Redux that this component depends on this part of the store's state. Now I'm saying part because that is very important. I tell you why. So this is how the counter is getting updated. Okay, clear? So I'll give you the next example. Now in this example, let's say I have a very simple form with two fields, two input fields, first name and last name. And I'm not sure if this is accessible enough. But so I have only two fields, first name and last name. But usually a form would have a lot of fields, right? And so earlier what we did is we separated out the component that needs to be re-rendered and the one that doesn't need to be re-rendered at all. Okay, but in this case, both of them needs to be re-rendered, right? But we will still do the similar thing what I did earlier. So if you see here, we have two text fields, two input fields. So if I type anything on the first name, even the last name is getting re-rendered, right? If I type on the last name, both first name and last name, they both are getting re-rendered. If I type any in any of the either of the field, right? So to fix that, we will do something very similar. So what I did again is, again, I have moved the first name and last name separate. So I have moved both of those input fields into different components. And see, this is what I really like about having centralized state management, where the components are not really dependent on each other. I can move this anywhere in the app. Okay. And also they are not dependent on each other. So I've broken down the user form into first name and last name. So now if you see, if I update the first name, only the first name is getting re-rendered. Right? The last name is not getting re-rendered. Now imagine if you have 10 or 15, 20 fields and a lot of fields in one single form, and the whole form is getting re-rendered only if you want to update one single input of the form, right? So that is definitely unnecessary, right? So instead of that, we could use this. We could do this. So how is this happening is, in the first name input, I am doing the same thing that I was doing in the user form. Instead, but just there's one small change. In the useSelector, I am selecting exactly the first name only. So that is what it is doing. So useSelector is basically registering this component and telling Redux that this component depends on this part of the state, like only the first name of the state. By the way, this name is nothing fancy. It is just an object, user object, which has first name, last name. It may have a lot of objects, sorry, a lot of fields. It currently has only first name and last name field. So it is just a simple object. So instead of selecting the complete object, it is better to select a very specific field inside the object. So that is how the first name is getting re-rendered only when the first name is updated, instead of the whole form getting re-rendered. And same is happening with the last name. Okay. So that is how you can use selector to best to make your app performant and prevent re-rendering of unnecessary components, right? Okay, so this was about useSelector. Now, the next thing is middlewares. So how many of you know what is the middleware? Business logic? Not really. You wanted to answer? Yeah, right. Anyone else? Yes. That is just an example, like, but what is middleware?
Middleware is something which will encapsulate the context thing which you need effectively and make it easy. Like an example, I would say Express.js is a middleware for Node app. That context. That's
Okay, okay. Yes.
So when we discuss go to that particular data to the store, if you manipulate that data, then we can do the.
Okay, so that was very specific to Redux, right? So people who have worked in the backend, they would definitely know what is the middleware. So middleware is nothing fancy. It is simply a function that will be called in the middle of when you called the actual function that you are supposed to call. Okay, between that and when you call it. Okay, so that is what middleware is. It is a kind of a filtering function that gets called in the middle. That is all about the middleware. That's what middleware is. Mostly it is there in the backend in any backend framework, but in Redux there is a middleware and it is very useful. And I'll show you how you can use that. So while you create the store, configure store. So I have this app store, very simple. I have used configure store, and inside that I have a counter ending, and now I will add the custom log. So custom logger is a very simple middleware that I've created only to simply log. So I wanted to have a history of the actions that were performed in Redux. Okay. So basically, let's say that so you want to log it somewhere in the report, or maybe you want to send some analytical events and track the user's actions, like what is the user doing and which action the user is performing, and also on that action what is happening, how the state is getting changed, what was the previous state, what is the state after the user performed that action, and anything in that inside that state. So you can access all of that inside this middleware, and this is basically called just before it is reached to the just before the UI is updated. Okay, re-rendered. So just before that, this middleware will be called. I mean, not exactly just before that, but so basically Redux has its own set of middlewares. Okay, and if there is any middleware already in the queue, so all those middlewares will be called. Okay, so if there is any other middleware after this, so that will be called after this, and then the UI will be re-rendered. Okay, so let's see this in action. Uh, yeah, so that's what I was thinking. You can't see, right? Okay. Visible? Okay, so now if I increment, you see, I'm getting all this. So it is saying dispatching. So this will give me the action that was performed. The action was counter slice and increment. And then the next state is 1. So this next state is basically called here, right? After the next. So next is, so if we call it before next, it will actually give me the state that was before the change in the state. So if I just say previous state, and that's it. So just before the next, if I get the state of that store, then I should be able to get the previous state. So if in the previous state, you see the counter's value is 0, right? In the next state, the counter's value is 1. Let me increment more, and then at the end, let's see. The previous is 5, the next is 6. So just before the UI is re-rendered, we get to know what was the previous value and the next value of the state. So this is just one example, but you could use middleware for a lot of different purposes. Like I told you, analytics, sending analytics, logging, and even debugging. So debugging reminds me of one more feature of Redux. So Redux has its own dev tools. Anybody aware of that?
Yes.
Right. So it is again one more or use the extension of Chrome. So I've already installed that extension. It is Redux. Is it visible? So just like what I was doing with middleware, so this already does it. The Redux devtool already does it. So if I, so let's say if I increment, now you will see one entry here. Here, if you see in the action, it will say counter slice. I have the name of the action. I have the state, like where the what is the state after this action. The value is 7, and the difference as well, like what was the previous value, which is 6, and then the value after the state is updated, that is 7. And the best part that I like about this is trace, in which we get to see from where exactly this action was called. This is very, very useful. So when you have any issue, any bug, and so usually it becomes very difficult to track like from where the action was called, right? So this is very useful. But it has a lot of features, only not only this feature, but it has a lot of features. So basically, this is a very big topic itself. And maybe I'll give this talk maybe in another session, deep diving into the Redux dev tools. Maybe me or any of my team members. But there are a lot of features. For example, if you see at the bottom, so it is like video, right? You can play it, you can go back and forth. So if I go back, the state of the UI also gets changed to its previous state. I simply slide it back. You see, the state is getting updated in the UI. I can go back and forth. It feels like video, right? It is pretty cool feature and it's very helpful if you want to debug something, right? And this is just a few of the things that Redux devtool provides, but I'm pretty sure there are a lot of features in it. So we definitely need to deep dive into it. So these are the ones that you can use to efficiently use Redux in React. And so for yeah, one thing I missed to tell you. So to use middleware, I've created this function. So this function, if you say this store next action, this is nothing fancy. This is just nested anonymous functions. Okay. So this is just latest what you say syntax for nested anonymous function. Nothing fancy. And after that, so this is how you get access to the store next and action. And this function is basically passed in the middleware. So in the middleware, we get default middleware. So like I told you earlier, that Redux has its own set of middlewares, right? So it performs some actions when the state is updated. And we definitely do not want to override that. And because of that, what we do is first we get all the existing middlewares. So we can do that using get default middleware and then simply concatenate with our own middleware. We can add multiple middlewares here. Just like that, just keep on adding more functions that will take this store next action. And that's it. That is how you can add middleware in your Redux app. And to configure your devtools, it also has this devtools options. So either you can make it true, false. If you make it by default, it is true. And if you pass false, then the devtools won't work. And it has a lot of configurations. You can check it out. It is pretty cool and very important in terms of development. You will get a very good developer experience with this. So that was about using Redux efficiently. So what we learned is where to exactly use useSelector. How is it beneficial? And so how to select only the part of the state that component really depends on. Okay. And then we saw how we can use middleware and what are the benefits of it. And then we saw Redux tool, dev tools, how to use it and what are the features available. So this is how we can efficiently use Redux in React.js. I mean, there is a lot more, but well, we don't have that much time. So that's it for now. Thank you all. So if you want to connect with us, you can scan this QR code. That's mine, and this is Nonstop's QR code. And if you want to read about our blogs or the things that we post, definitely you should connect to us. Any questions? Can you?
What is Redux toolkit?
So Redux toolkit is, so we have Redux, right? So this was actually on Redux toolkit. So Redux is definitely, it is a state management library and all that. Redux toolkit is another version of it, which mainly supports the functional components. Okay, it has all those hooks like use effect and use dispatch that can be used in functional component. And it has a very less boilerplate code and very less complicated code, so that you can focus on your business logic or on your code instead of configuring the Redux and mapping and all those things that is there in Redux. Instead of that, so we have Redux toolkit. So that is what it is. Okay then. Thank you guys.